Time for us to explore our very last linkage institution. So we're going to talk about interest groups and what they are and how they connect people to the government and impact policy making, because that's really their focus. So we'll talk a lot about interest groups and try to give you some examples that you've probably heard of. So here's one that I think you guys have heard of for sure, which is the National Rifle Association, the NRA. You see that President Trump is giving a speech here, and you see a bunch of regular people, so it is definitely a way that people can be connected with the government. But we're going to talk about how interest groups are different than political parties and try to figure out the things that interest groups do. Today's objective, we're going to describe the role of interest groups. We're going to go through all the different things that interest groups do. We want to be able to explain how they connect people to the government. So they play a very similar role like political parties, but they're different in a lot of ways, and so that's what we'll look at today. We're going to answer the question, how do interest groups link people to the government? First, we're going to talk about how interest groups are different than political parties. So here's another example of an interest group that I think you guys have heard of. This is, of course, President Obama. He's speaking at the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So this is an example of an interest group, and let's talk about why it's an interest group and not a political party. So one of the main ways that interest groups and political parties are different is their main goal. We talked a lot about political parties, and their main goal was to win elections. They want to focus on who the government is. Like, they want to control who is operating the government, who is controlling the different offices. Interest groups, on the other hand, their focus, their main goal is to influence the policy. They want influence over which policies get made, and so instead of controlling who the government is, they try to control what the government does. They don't usually care one way or another about who's in charge, as long as whoever is in charge is making the types of policy changes that the group wants. So political parties will focus on winning elections, but interest groups will focus on influencing policies. Another big difference between interest groups and political parties is that political parties are made up of policy generalists. We talked about that a lot when we were talking about the president and Congress, and those are people that represent political parties, right? They are policy generalists because they need to know a little bit about all the policies. If you are a member of a political party, you are probably paying attention to all different types of policies, and you've got some idea about all the different goals of the party. The interest groups, on the other hand, are policy specialists. That means they're going to focus on one policy or one type of policy. They probably won't know anything about any other parts of the policy goals or what the government's up to, but they are going to focus everything on one particular policy or one particular type of policy. So the political parties we would call generalists because they know a little bit about everything. The interest groups we're going to call policy specialists because they're going to know everything about one particular policy. Political parties are flexible in their policy stances. Political parties, they may change their policies from time to time because remember, their goal is just to win elections. So they're going to change their policy. They may adopt new ideas or new policies because those are the things that voters want. Political parties are going to do whatever will attract voters. And so if they change their stance on policies from time to time, that's totally normal. Interest groups tend to be based on policies that don't change. Like, they form around a particular policy stance and they don't change the things that they want the government to do. They support parties because the parties are more likely to enact their particular policy. So an interest group may support Democrats now because Democrats share their policy goal, but may change in the future and support Republicans if Republicans are more likely to support their policy goal. The people who represent you as part of a political party tend to represent you based on where you live. For example, in Tennessee, like living here in Memphis, my representative in the Democratic Party is Steve Cohen, and that's based entirely on where I live and what my address is. If I was a Republican, my representatives would possibly, include David Kustoff if I lived in a different part of town, but would include Senators Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty based on where I live in the state. So political parties represent you where you live, but interest groups represent you based on what you believe. So people often choose interest groups. They like interest groups better because they have more control over who represents them. And another difference here is that with a political party, people tend to be loyal to a political party for a long time. This becomes like a part of their identity, and it's something that they associate. They associate a loyalty to that party as a long-term relationship. But with the interest group, the supporters only have party loyalty that's temporary. It's only based on what the party actually does and what their stance is. So people who are part of an interest group may be loyal to Republicans now, may be loyal to Democrats later, but their party loyalty is going to change way more often. Another big difference here would be size. With a political party, you want it to be as big as possible. Its success depends on appealing to as many people as you possibly can. The bigger a political party is, the more successful they become. They want to get more and more and more voters. Interest groups are a little different. They try more to focus on a narrow group of people. They want to find, the right people that are going to become a part of their interest group and everything. And interest groups actually become less effective the bigger they become. Interest groups, the general public kind of distrusts interest groups. And so the more attention that an interest group gets, that tends to be worse for an interest group, where that would be great for a political party. So the bigger the group becomes, the less effective the interest group may be at actually influencing policy. So we'll take a look at that tomorrow, talking about how big groups have more difficulty getting the job done than small interest groups do. But with political parties, you want your group to be as big as possible. Another big difference between political parties and interest groups is the way that people feel about them, especially like regular voters, regular people participating. So with political parties, most people look at political parties as like something good and something necessary. Like, even though, they do some things that people don't always like, people think about political parties is they're doing the things that are just part of playing the game of politics. So like when they negatively campaign and stuff like that, that's just all a part of politics. So people look at political parties like they're supposed to be there and they belong in politics and that they're necessary. But with interest groups, the average voter looks at them negatively. The average voter doesn't feel as connected to an interest group. And so when they see interest groups participating in politics, they're more likely to think of the interest groups as like participating in corruption. The political party does something shady, that's just politics. But when the interest group is trying to influence policymaking, that looks a lot more like corruption to the average voter. So the way the average person feels about political parties is that they're good, they're necessary, they belong in politics. But when they look at interest groups, they think of interest groups as negatively impacting politics. They shouldn't be there. They're a part of politics that don't really belong, and they don't connect with the average voter. This right here is the most obvious difference. This is the thing that will allow us to easily tell what is a political party and what is an interest group. Political parties run candidates for office. Interest groups don't. Political parties have people that are trying to win offices who are identified by their relationship with the political party. Interest groups do not run candidates for office. They're not trying to control different offices of the government. And so that is the basic difference. If an interest group were to nominate a candidate for a particular office, then it has become a political party. Its goal has completely changed. It's trying to control who is operating the government instead of what the government does. All right, so we started with how to tell the difference between political parties and interest groups. What is it about these two linkage institutions that sets them apart from each other? Now we're going to shift over and focus only on interest groups, and we're going to look at all the things that interest groups do.